this thing.bo or vo or dao.php structure.
They put it as the first step because it's not the easiest step.
No, yeah, like it seems easy if you're used to developing like projects and frameworks and everything that are composer based, but then when you go to actually like build an autoloader for the first time for a project not built in that structure, it starts to get iffy. What's up, Eric?
What's going on?
It's going well. We're good, actually. Yeah, grammar. There's a reason I need going on a vacation next week.
Where you headed?
Or after next week. I'm going to Hawaii.
Yeah.
I've never been, so this is going to be the first time. I've got a...
Which island?
I suck at the island names, but I'm landing in Honolulu and effectively staying. Yeah. I think Terry might actually know, like Miko. Yeah, but she's already married and everything, but her husband's, a lot of his family lives in Hawaii, so they're doing like a second reception in Hawaii. I couldn't make the wedding because originally it was supposed to be in Hawaii at this time, and then they decided to just do effectively a shotgun wedding here in town, right when I was out of town. So I got invited to the reception. We should probably start. So I'm going for like the first day or two of that trip for the wedding reception thing for her, and then are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
What could go wrong?
How do I get out of this?
It's texture, man. Just.
I wish. Funnily enough, that technology does exist. It's just not this probably like $5,000 projector. All right, gotta move over here now. For anyone partaking in the pizza, apologies. It's a little bit colder than usual because I asked them to deliver it at 6:45. They delivered it at 5, which is almost like 6:45.
That's one of the three numbers?
Yeah, it's one of the three numbers. So it's been sitting on a bench table while I've been next door at CU29 hanging out with coworkers.
Thanks.
But you think being outside it would have kept it a little bit warmer than it probably is? But
It's definitely more wrong.
after I do the wedding eve reception stuff, I'm pretty much just left to my own devices in Hawaii, and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do.
Honestly, just get a beach chair and lay down.
I mean, one of the days I plan on effectively just sitting on the beach the entire day and doing not much, but sitting on the beach, trying to not get a sunburn, and figuring out how I'm going to do the whole drinking situation since I'm not staying in a hotel. I'm doing an Airbnb because hotels in Hawaii are fucking expensive. Believe it or not. Alright. You gonna work? Please. Pretty please. Hey. It's a thing. That. And then, sure, it doesn't on the right screen, but yeah, pretty much I'm planning part of my trip this weekend, next week, right before I get there. The other half of me is like, I'm single, I'm young, I'm just gonna play it by ear, have fun, see what happens. That's where I go. Enjoy life to its fullest. Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna burn real hard. Like, about 2 weeks ago, we had a company like boat party on Lake Austin, and days were like, all right, we gonna set a timer. I'm gonna reapply sunscreen on this cadence, and it's gonna be great. And then the White Claws started flowing because I'm a basic white bitch, and never reapplied sunscreen. Thankfully, got lucky and only got like a little bit on my shoulder. Thankfully, the boat had like a lower deck that was covered and air conditioned and everything. But yeah,
So
usually
what
I
you're saying
burn a
is
lot.
that the laws of physics still apply when you're drinking claws?
Yeah. Well, they do say the laws. There's no law when you're drinking claw. Physics do still apply. And unfortunately, that means sunburns.
Wait, what's a claw?
White Claw. It's a spiked
It's-
seltzer.
Oh, it's that.
It's-
Yeah.
It's Zima. Yeah, it's Zima.
Yeah, it's Zima.
It's those things have been taken over.
Yeah. Oh shit. Oh.
And I still refuse to drink them. It just seems like a horrible idea for me.
Honestly, they're not that bad, and they're really not that alcoholic. Like, I went through everyone's body tolerance and everything aside. Like, I went through about 4 of them and barely felt buzzed, which wound up being perfect because unfortunately we got back from the boat party around like 3:30 that Friday, and at 4 o'clock, the entirety of our business basically went down for 2 hours, and I did not have my laptop, but I immediately took one of the other engineering manager's laptops and used his to try and solve the problem for 2 hours. It wound up being it was a shitty week as it is, but effectively, one of our services we integrate with had an outage. Like, it was like, hey, we're doing the maintenance overnight, and then the next day, oops, outage, which is hilarious coming from Oracle. And then around the time we got back from the boat party is when they came back online. Meanwhile, this entire time, the services we integrated are just queuing up all this data ready to go.
Oh no.
So then they started turning campaigns back on.
So they just
And-
DOS
It's
And
a
then-
nothing. So then we effectively DDoSed ourselves for 2 hours.
Did you have like auto-scaling in there?
I mean, we're literally like individually provisioned EC2 instances.
Oh no.
So we were basically like trying to figure out how to block on our other DevOps guys trying to figure out how to actually get the real IP from the fucking load balancer correctly in Nginx to block an IP level coming from their serverless bullshit. And I'm going the other route of like just block the fucking node user agent that all these calls to API are happening. And we figured it out around the same time, and right as we figured it out, it didn't even matter because finally we were able to get the people on the phone and ask them like, hey, take all the queues you've built up for all this and just dump it. Just drop the queues, clear it out. They had to clear it out twice, and then finally it lit up. So I went from being buzzed to very sober, which was really annoying.
Sounds like it.
All right, 5 out of 8 is not bad. I'm gonna go and get started because this is going to potentially be a pretty long topic to talk about. So, welcome to the Laravel Austin meetup. My name is Hunter Skrasik. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Modernize, for providing both the pizza and sodas as well as the AWS account to play around with and test out Vapor, which is what our topic is tonight.
Yay, vaporize. Here, yay,
Vapor,
modernize.
yeah, thanks, Modernize. Calendar-wise, we've got the Austin PHP meetup next week. This would usually be around the time I'd be like, hey, you should go check it out. At the moment, it looks like I'll be presenting this exact same topic at Austin PHP. So if you want a refresher or round 2 on it, then check it out. Otherwise, you're already ahead of the curve. Our next meetup is next month, October 3rd. As for conferences,
What day of the week is up the week is October? Because there's been a lot of like Monday, Thursday.
we're back to just consistent Thursdays at this point. As for conferences, we've got Cascadia PHP later this month, September 19th to 21st. Great conference, great organizers. They were a huge help and definitely fluffed up and said a lot of nice things about long-term PHP while we were throwing the show on, so gotta throw them some support as well. And it's got a lot of great speakers. I think you're speaking at it, right, again?
Yes, I am.
And another one of our organizers, Jess. recommend checking it out if you've got the time. Otherwise, we've got PHP World. Shame on me that PHP's first P was uppercase. How dare I? And the later half of October. It's been a while since I've been to a World, but the last time I went, which was actually Bolivian, was a lot of fun, very enjoyable in Washington, D.C. area. That's right? Yeah. Close enough. And then we've got a few more conferences in the later half of the year around November, but I'll talk about those more when we get closer to November. All right, so let's see if I can get this to correctly. Nope, that's the opposite direction. Try again. Awesome. So, tonight's topic is about Laravel Vapor. At this point, depending on how in tune with the Laravel ecosystem and community you are, you've probably heard about this awesome new tool that Otwell's brought into the Laravel ecosystem. It was announced at Laracon US. I can't remember if it was talked about at all at Laracon EU at the end of August. I know a lot of other cool things were talked about, which we'll get to at some point. Am I going to have a clicker tonight? Maybe? Yeah. Yes.
What floor is the celebration, the awards? The Apple Factory, is that the 13th floor? Or what is it?
It'll probably
I saw people clearing stuff out. It looked like the party was happening on
Okay.
fire.
Yeah.
It'll be 5 or 16.
That's fine.
Okay.
I know because I had on sex when I heard it. Yeah, that yelling.
So, diving in, what is Laravel Vapor? Unshamelessly ripped from the website. Vapor is a auto-scaling serverless deployment platform for Laravel, powered by AWS Lambda. Whoops, I had an extra R there. Manage your Laravel infrastructure on Vapor and fall in love with the scalability and simplicity of serverless. Very Bob-Bell-esque speak, but it's pretty apt to what it is. It's effectively a way to run Laravel on a serverless infrastructure instead of having to worry about Docker containers or EC2 instances, etc., etc. Highlighting some of the features, it's got auto-scaling web and queue infrastructure, fine-tuned for Laravel. There's zero downtime deployments and rollbacks when deploying with Vapor. You can achieve database and cache tunnels, allowing for easy local inspection. It automatically uploads assets to CloudFront CDN during your deployment, so any of your images, CSS, etc. will be automatically handled and put on AWS's CDN CloudFront, so you don't have to worry about it. You have the option to see a variety of application, database, and cache metrics, and Vapor is very CI friendly. So some of the requirements to utilize Laravel Vapor: you need to be running PHP 7.3 plus compatible applications. You need to be using Laravel 6.0 or above, just released this week if I remember correctly. And you'll need a AWS IAM user with preferably administrator access policy, since Vapor is going to be creating a lot of resources across the entirety of AWS. The documentation recommends it. Obviously, can be reservations about giving an account just administrator access. The docs don't highlight every single policy this user is going to need to function correctly, but I'm sure either you can figure it out or you can reach out to Otwell and have a better idea of what exactly those policies are if you want to be more precise with the policies assigned to this user. But effectively, you need this user to get the access key ID and the secret key. Vapor comes with its own CLI tool. It's a pretty handy client for interacting with Laravel Vapor. Pretty much anything you can do in the Vapor UI, you can do via the CLI command. Installing is very simple and straightforward. You just use, either you can install it per project using Composer Require Laravel Vapor CLI, or you can install it as a global command using Composer Global Require. Once you install it, you'll need to run the Vapor login command, which will just prompt you for your username and password for the account you created with Vapor. And then once you're logged in, it's all going to go and can interact with your account correctly. So let's dive into the basics, starting with projects. So creating a project is pretty straightforward. You can either use the Vapor UI or you can use the Vapor init CLI command. I utilized the init command when I set up a test project. If you go to the CLI route, you need to execute it within the root of the Laravel project you wish to deploy. When you run the init command, it'll prompt you for the AWS accounts the project should be associated with. You can associate multiple AWS accounts with Laravel Vapor, so potentially if you're a contractor managing applications for various clients you work with various AWS accounts, you can switch between the AWS accounts and create the project in the right place in the right AWS account. And you'll also be asked which AWS region that it should be deployed to. For the purposes of me testing, I deployed to US West 1 because everything we have is in US East 1, or as Ian calls it frequently, US Tire Fire. Yes?
So Vapor's not even public yet, though, is it?
Not yet.
Do you have access to it?
Yeah, I signed up for and got early access.
How long does that take?
I don't know when they started rolling out early access to it, so
I think they started like a few days after Laracon.
Yeah, so as soon as the early access was available, I signed up, and about a week or so ago is when I got the email saying I had access to it.
Were you able to use it before Tuesday when version 6 launched?
No, I didn't try to, is a better answer. Like, I didn't start playing with it until coincidentally Tuesday this week is when I started playing with it and doing all the preparation for this talk. I know it sounds last minute, but it's literally every weekend.
I think the San Diego PHP folks started playing with it. They got the invite about the same time you did, and they actually got it working on, I think they were just going off of master on Laravel, and that would have gotten, it would have been basically Laravel 6, but prior to coming out.
Proper tagging. So you could have beforehand. I personally just happened, the timing wound up being perfect that 6 came out this week around the time I started preparing for this talk. So when you run the init command, it'll generate a vapor.yaml file within the root of your project. It will, and this is actually from the project I created, this is effectively the base Vapor configuration file. You'll get created, you'll get an ID, and basically just ignore that. A name, the Vapor demo, you can tweak that if you want to name the project slightly differently from your folder structure. And then you are immediately started with 2 environments, production and staging, with memory configuration and a few build steps or build hooks, which I'll dive into a bit later in the presentation. As for project settings, you can access these in the Vapor UI, and they're very bare bones. Literally the only thing is being able to provide a GitHub repository for the project. This is not required, but if you do provide it, it'll allow Vapor to provide links to GitHub for each deployment's commit hash that you can associate with it, but none of this is obviously required. So, for example, if you're not using GitHub, you won't be able to utilize this feature. Or you can still utilize pushing commit hashes into deployment, but obviously you're not going to get the fancy linking to your repository. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for projects. They're intentionally bare bones because the entirety of the meat for Vapor is actually encompassed within the environments nested under the project. All the deployments and all the invoked commands, aka artisan, are stored within the environment. And as you saw earlier, projects are initially created with staging and production environments, but there is no limit to how many environments you create. So Doc's mentioned an example of, like, if you want to test this new feature, but you don't want to break your staging environment flow, then you can just make a new quick throwaway environment, utilize it, test it, whatever, and then once you're done, delete it, get rid of it, and Creating an environment is pretty straightforward. You can use the Vapor CLI, running Vapor env and giving it a name. This will update and populate your Vapor.yml configuration file with just very bare bones build steps, which is effectively the same thing. We'll look at the production of composer install no dev, class map authoritative. I don't even know what that option means, but I see it a lot. Probably shouldn't be using it at work. Environments can have environment variables. This concept we're probably used to because Laravel comes bundled with .env files. Vapor is a little bit more advanced with its environment variables, but basically each environment has some set of variables, crucial information to your application during execution. This is for most of us that are familiar with Laravel, very straightforward. If you need to update environment variables, you can either go through the Vapor UI or you can use the CLI commands. If you go the route of CLI commands, you'll run Vapor env pool, provide the environment name, and it will download a .env.environment name file onto your system, make your edits, make your tweaks to this file, and then once you're done and you've made the updates you need to make, you run Vapor env push, same environment name, and it will load that env file with all your changes into the environment variables within Vapor's system. Vapor treats environment variables a little bit differently than we're used to, so it'll automatically inject a variety of variables based on the environment's configured database, caching, etc. So we're used to having to specify per environment a DB host and a cache host, etc., etc. Vapor handles all this for you. Once you create those various resources, and which I'll get into later, and associate them with the environment, you don't actually have to specify those variables. Vapor will automatically inject them into the environment as it's deploying the environment. So you don't have to worry about each environment's database hosts and caching hosts, etc. Vapor's got it handled for you. But if you want to, you can actually, any of the environment variables that Vapor would inject, you can override them, and if you define them yourself, then Vapor will not inject them into your environment for you. A cool thing about Vapor, and I'm going to rehash this later, I'm going to mention it now, whenever you deploy an environment, it'll deploy the environment with the environment variables. If you, say, change something about those environment variables, and then for some reason need to roll back to a previous deployment, Vapor will actually use the environment variables as they existed for that deployment. So back deployments, Vapor is intelligent enough to know the state of those environment variables per deployment, and when you roll back, it'll basically reinitialize the variables to the state that they were in during that deployment, which is honestly really cool. Just thinking about it. I don't know how they do it. I wish I did. Never going to get access to that source code. I think they do something with DynamoDB on like the back end a little bit because it's mentioned a few times in the docs. But that concept is really cool. That is just automatically handled for you. So AWS Lambda has a variety of limitations. One of those is your environment variables in total can only be 4 kilobytes. But Vapor has the concept of secrets that will also inject into your environment, which can be much larger. So if you need anything stored on a per environment base that's larger than 4 kilobytes, it's highly recommended you use Vapor secrets. You can interact with Vapor secrets using the Vapor CLI, Vapor Secret Production, or through the UI. Most things are in both. There's only a few things, which I'll touch on later, that are only CLI based. As I mentioned before, if you roll back to a previous deployment, it'll use the environment variables as they were for that deployment. Same thing for secrets. It'll use the secrets in the state that they were in for that deployment instead of keeping the secrets the same. A common use case for this will be storing passports, like Laravel passports keys. So they've actually gone a step further and added a helper function to easily store these passport keys as secrets using the secret passport CLI command, and basically it just automatically handles bringing in those, I believe the private pub key into secrets so that passport can function correctly, since those will generally push you past the 4 kilobyte restriction on environment variables. So environments are assigned a unique, as they call, vanity URL, which you can use to access the application immediately. So you don't even have to worry about buying a domain and blah, blah, blah. You can deploy Vapor, not even know really what you're going to name the application yet, and immediately start interacting with it or demoing it or whatever. Vapor's, multiple times I'll probably say this, but Vapor is incredibly smart. When it serves these vanity URLs, it automatically is adding a no index header to the response, so your environment's vanity URLs will never be indexed by search engines. Vapor has, and I'll touch on this in a little bit, the concept of maintenance mode, which should be, if you've used it in Laravel, the artisan down, artisan up commands to putting your application in maintenance mode. Vapor has that same concept, but it goes a step further. So if you put your application in maintenance mode, if you're hitting the custom domain, for example, you'll get your maintenance mode splash screen. But if you're interacting with vanity URLs, your application's still running. So that allows you to effectively test to make sure your application's in a good state. Like say you're doing a database, huge database scaling migration or something that is going to impact your site enough that you have to put it in maintenance mode. You can actually still empower your teams or yourself to test that the application is working after the fact before taking it out of maintenance mode using these vanity URLs. In the same realm, environments can add custom domains. To attach a custom domain to an environment, you will need a certificate for that domain because Vapor applications are required to utilize SSL. But on the plus side, the certificates that Vapor can create for you are free. So don't have to worry about it. They're automatically renewing. Very straightforward. I'll later on in this presentation dive into how you can create these certificates, but noticing the trend of how I've been talking, it can either be through the UI or through the CLI command. To associate the domain after you create the certificate, you can just update the vapor.yaml file and add a domain to the environment to tie it together. Whenever you deploy the environment, Vapor will automatically configure the environment to handle requests of the domain and also provide you with CNAME records for the domain. If you're using Vapor to manage your DNS, once again, another topic I'll get to at the end, most of these resource things like domains, databasing, caching, etc. will be near the end of this presentation. But if Vapor will basically add the records for this domain to a Vapor DNS zone for you. So if you're using Vapor to manage your DNS, you don't have to worry about it. If you aren't, then you'll need to use these you'll basically need to take note of these CNAME records and update whatever you are using for DNS appropriately. Since Vapor is utilizing AWS CloudFront in front of the application, your custom domains will typically take around 30 to 45 minutes to become fully active. So if you're not seeing it working yet, don't panic. It just, with how CloudFront works, it takes a while to be active. Still faster than the DNS propagation of old. You have a question?
Once you're done with the environment section, about environments. Okay, this is.
I still got more environments, but you'll know because I have all these sections prefixed with one section. So let's see.
Yeah.
I've got a few more slides, maybe about 10 or so. So if you'd like to ask your question now, go for it.
Let me ask it now. So is there a way to sort of password protect an environment or somehow put like an authentication layer over it so that you can safely enable debug mode, because you don't want untrusted people to be able to access an application that is running in debug mode, because you can leave all your code.
Like the HTTP basic auth, for example, in front of it? Or?
Yeah, or just something like that. I mean, that's the...
I mean, at the end of the day, this is all provisioning AWS resources, so if you're familiar with AWS on an intimate level, you could go into the appropriate resource and handle that. But the kind of, I'm making a guess on how Vapor works and everything. The way to handle that is like if you've got an application running in debug mode at the moment, probably like the Vapor suggested way would be to put that environment into maintenance mode so that anyone hitting your custom domain will never actually reach the application. And then you would utilize the vanity URL to access it while it's in debug mode to figure it out.
The reason I was asking about this is because this is actually not something that's so easy to do at the AWS level, because like you can't, maybe you can add basic auth to
I'll bet you can do that at the ALB.
Wait, can you or not?
The ALB stuff has gotten a bit more advanced in terms of what you can do there. That's my guess. And all this Lambda stuff, I'm sure, is sitting behind the ALB.
Yeah,
so
I didn't know ALB was part of that.
Yes and no. I'll get to that in quite a few slides, but yes and no. Vapor does not have a built-in solution, is the answer to your question. But if you do have the knowledge of the systems that Vapor is provisioning for you, then you can probably create your own solution to that.
So, I mean, the reason I was asking is because to me, it seems like this would be something sensible to fix at like the framework level, which of course is
You mean adding middleware for basic auth into your entire application, determined by an environment variable existing or not?
Something like that, but you'd also need to you need to have like part of the code circumvent debug mode basically, like.
Yeah.
So which is like something you need to like hack Laravel to do. So I thought like, oh, maybe Laravel got hacked to do that, because this is going to be like such a.
Most of Laravel's tweaks to its core were to allow it to run in a more serverless infrastructure environment. Unfortunately, for like the use case you're mentioning, nothing was really added. So there's a way to sort of emulate it if you can afford to put the entire application in maintenance mode while you're debugging. But if you can't, you'll have to kind of build something yourself to empower that. Vapor supports wildcard subdomains. You can attach them to the environment. It's also using an application load balancer. The docs are interesting. They mention using an application load balancer. They don't mention if wildcard subdomains work with the usual way that Vapor apps are deployed. So I'm not fully sure on if using a wildcard subdomain forces you into an ALB. That would require a little bit more.
Oh, just read the previous topic. Sorry, but the most like beautiful, amazing way would be to Vapor integrated with like, because ALB has this like new integration with like Cognito, where like based on like a cookie set, it will like instead use like some Cognito endpoint and then do like OAuth or whatever. So like in theory, you could, if you were like an AWS and like Laravel Wizard, you could have like a Vapor option to like put an environment behind like OAuth via AWS Cognito. So like that, and that would be like really cool, but it doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, Vapor doesn't have it provided. You'd have to build that yourself. I'm sure other people would, if you could open source it, would enjoy that. Another approach to it, and kind of something we use for exposing our at Modernize, we're not using Vapor because it hasn't even fully come out yet. But we use Horizon for our queue management and how we expose that dashboard is effectively, we've got the trusted proxies middleware running, so we can get the real IP in the application, and we're effectively looking to see if the request to Horizon is coming from either our VPN or within the office. And if so, then we render the dashboard, otherwise you get an unauthenticated response. And even then, you really can't even access it unless you know the internal URL to our application, since we're using API Gateway in front of. So another approach would be basically doing an IP thing of, hey, it's coming from the office IP, so enable debug mode. Otherwise, don't. So I mentioned maintenance mode quite a few times. Whenever you enable maintenance mode, you can either do it during the Vapor UI or using the down CLI command. I'm going to be a very broken record in this presentation mentioning the ability to use UI versus CLI, but these will look very familiar to the artisan down and up commands. Just in Vapor, you'll provide the environment name that you're putting in maintenance mode. In this case, in the example provided, we're putting production in maintenance mode and then doing whatever and then bringing it out of maintenance mode. And like I mentioned before, each environment's assigned a Vanity URL. While the application is in maintenance mode, you can still access the application if you know the Vanity URL. You can actually customize the maintenance mode screen should you need to. I don't actually know what the default looks like, but I do have an app provision, so we can test that out if there's time at the end of this. But you can effectively customize it by just placing a 503.html file in your application's root directory. With my very recent, as in today, experience with CloudFormation, I'm assuming Vapor is effectively telling CloudFormation to send all traffic to this 503 file, and if you specify this file in your application's directory, it's uploading it or telling CloudFormation to route all traffic to this HTML file. So you can, environments have the concept of commands. They effectively allow you to execute arbitrary artisan commands against an environment. Once again, Vapor UI or CLI commands. All the examples I give here will be the CLI command because it's much easier to fit into the slides than a screenshot of the UI. I have access, we can dive into it near the end if there's time. But you can call it in one of two fashions. You can either do Vapor command to production, and if you run that, it'll actually prompt you asking for which artisan command you'd like to run, or you can run it using Vapor command, environment name, -- command, and then you should provide a PHP artisan, whatever command you want to run. Pre-warming, and this is actually this section of the presentation will probably be very familiar to our resident Lambda expert, Ian. So by default, when an environment's deployed, the first request it receives will effectively encounter a cold start. Whenever this is when AWS is actually provisioning the containers to run the serverless application behind the scenes to actually serve the request. These requests will incur a penalty. Good job, Hunter. Nice typo. A few seconds while AWS is performing that action. If your application needs to mitigate cold starts, so effectively not incur that response time penalty, you can actually mitigate those by defining a warm configuration value per environment. Excuse me. This value represents how many serverless containers Vapor will pre-warm by making concurrent requests to the newly deployed application before it's activated for public accessibility. And then if you define this option, Vapor will actually continue to pre-warm these containers by sending a request to them every 10 minutes while the application is deployed. If your application has high enough traffic and speed is a huge concern, you'll most likely want to utilize this value to just keep a number of containers available to serve requests so that people don't have to incur that slight extra long response time as AWS is doing all its magic and spinning things up behind the scenes. You can configure concurrency on the environment level. By default, Vapor allows your application to process at max concurrency, which is typically 1,000 concurrent requests executing at the same time. You can tweak this to lower it or theoretically raise it above that 10,000, though, or sorry, 1,000. Most likely you won't want to raise it above that. And one of the things it mentions is if you have a good idea of the maximum concurrency you can expect for your application, it's not a bad idea to set it in the configuration, because otherwise you can potentially leave yourself open to, and this is a problem across anyone using AWS, especially with auto scaling, et cetera, to DDoS attacks that can suddenly drive your AWS costs sky high as it's having to provision a ton of resources on the fly to serve this basically DDoS attack. You can configure the environment's timeout per environment. By default, Vapor will limit web requests to a maximum execution of 10 seconds. As a note, AWS does not allow Lambda executions to process for more than 15 minutes. So I would really hope that you don't have a web request that takes 15 minutes to respond, but that is a maximum. But that does apply to like CLI things that are going to be running within a Lambda function. For example, your queue workers, stuff like that. I'll dive into a little bit more on that later. You can get metrics on a per environment level. Once again, they're visible in the Vapor UI, or you can get the metrics using the metrics CLI command, effectively just Vapor metrics, provide the environment, and you can optionally provide a time frame for these. You have to use the UI for this, but you can configure alarms for all environment metrics using the Vapor UI. They'll notify you via the communication method that you specify within the UI whenever the configured threshold is broken and whenever they recover. This is, I can't imagine it's using anything else, but it's most likely using CloudWatch behind the scenes to power this functionality. And then finally, saying goodbye to an environment. If you no longer need an environment, you can delete it via the UI, or you can use the env delete CLI command. So that's effectively it on environments. Now we dive into deployments. And one of the primary features that I highlighted earlier is Laravel Vapor is the atomic zero-time deployments. Unlike pretty much most of the other Vapor features, you can only initiate deployments via the Vapor CLI. During the deployment, we saw it earlier, Vapor will run the build steps specified in your Vapor YAML file on the machine the deployment is running from. This can either be your personal machine, which is what I did to deploy a test application, or a continuous integration platform like CircleCI, AWS's, what is it called, like Code Deploy or something, Travis CI, GitLab CI, et cetera, So to initiate a deploy, it's pretty simple, straightforward. Just run the CLI command, Vapor deploy, specify an environment, and it will deploy that environment. You can specify build hooks for an environment using the build key within your Vapor YAML file. I'll show that in a second. Actually, hey, perfect. These commands are executed against the deployed environments before it's activated. Sorry, go back one. These commands are executed as deploy hooks. You'll see what the build hooks look like in a second. But the build hooks are executed on the machine that the deployment's running on, and effectively they're used to prepare the application for deployment. Whenever you're deploying, the application is actually built in a temporary .vapor folder, and all the commands that you specify in your build hooks are ran within that directory. On the flip side, there are deploy hooks. This is what the Vapor configuration file looks like. These are the build commands I just mentioned. So running composer install, clearing the event cache. The build hooks, for example, PHP Artisan Migrate Force, are executed against the already deployed environment before it's actually activated for general availability. If any of these deploy hooks fail, the deployment's not activated. So you don't have to worry about Vapor unintentionally deploying a broken environment. However many of these have, as long as one of them fails, the deployment's not being activated. Your application's still running. You can debug what happened and then fix it and move forward. Speaking of that debugging, you can actually see the output or logs from the deployment hooks via the Vapor UI's deployment detail screen. When you're deploying, when it comes to assets, Vapor will automatically extract all the assets in your application, like poke directory, and upload them to S3. And Vapor will also create a AWS CloudFront distribution, effectively CDN, so that these assets can be distributed across the world in a nice, speedy, accelerated fashion. Because all your assets are going to be served via S3 or CloudFront, instead of specifying the URLs in your application to images, etc., like via direct paths, you should always use Laravel's asset helper. Whenever you're using Vapor, it will inject a asset URL environment variable, which the helper will use to construct the correct URLs. On subsequent deployments, the only assets that will be uploaded to S3 are the ones that have changed. Otherwise, the unchanged assets will just be copied over from the previous deployment into your newest deployment. If you do a lot of CSS, you're probably familiar with using different things like background image and specifying a URL within your CSS with a backend image. And as long as it's a relative URL, Vapor will automatically prepin the correct asset base URL to all of those URLs in CSS during the build process. So you don't have to worry about that. It'll be able to correctly reference the assets that are part of your application. Redeploying. Should you need to redeploy an environment, say after you've updated an environment variable, you can either do this via the UI or using the CLI commands, Vapor redeploy environment name. Rollbacks. Something happened, something broke, an unexpected bug, you need to roll back. You can either use the rollback to button within Vapor's UI, or you can use the CLI command. If you just do Vapor rollback production and you don't specify which deployment to roll back to, Vapor will just automatically roll back to the last successful deployment. Or if you need to roll back further to a specific deployment, you can actually pass the select or use the UI to roll back to that environment. And like I mentioned before, any environment variables, any environment secrets, as they existed at the time of that deployment, will be reinstated in that state.
Quick question about rollback specifically. Of course, Laravel has this whole thing about migrations, and Laravel you can roll back migrations. Will a Vapor roll back database migrations?
It does not call that out specifically in the documentation, so my assumption is no, it will not.
And then you gotta just roll it back manually, basically.
Yeah. You'll need to roll back manually.
Best anyway.
Exactly, because that database stuff is very difficult to deal with in an automatic fashion.
Automate that.
It's why you have to actually specify a build hook of Artisan Migrate Force instead of Vapor automatically running that for you, because that's a potentially very dangerous assumption to make.
I don't know why you need to do -- force.
Oh yeah, because when it's in a production environment, it'll prompt you to
Yeah,
input.
they're
Yeah.
Most of us are not deploying our applications to any environment, let alone production, from our local machine, or maybe you are, but most of us are familiar with and use work CI systems that are in charge of building and then deploying the application. Vapor is very CI friendly. You can deploy using CI. You'll just need to add a Vapor API token, environment variable, to the CI environment. You can generate this API token in your Vapor API settings dashboard within the UI. As I mentioned before, whenever you deploy, you can actually pass commit information to the Vapor deploy command. This example is based off of a tool that I'm not familiar with, like CodeHash or Code something. But you can effectively pass in the commit ID of the commit you're deploying, as well as whatever the message associated with that commit is, so you can have more context around your deployments. And then this is not really deployment based, but it's called out in documentation, so I'll call it out here. If you need to return binary responses from your application, for example, PDF downloads, your response should always include a header X Vapor base64 encode true. I don't know specifically what exactly this is doing on behind the scenes, but my assumption is it's telling Vapor to do some base64 encoding of the response so that it can be correctly delivered by Lambda and all the way up to the chain, etc. Any questions at this point? All right, diving into resources. Starting off with queues. So one of Laravel's many features that is super handy is Laravel's queuing and the variety of drivers it supports. With Vapor, you can continue to utilize this functionality just in the same ways you use with traditional hosting. The only difference is Vapor will actually automatically scale your queue on demand within seconds, should you get a sudden burst of queued items. Whenever you're using Vapor, it will automatically use AWS SQS service, and Vapor will automatically configure this for you. As I mentioned before, serverless applications on AWS may only process a single request for 15 minutes. This applies to each of your queue items. So if you have queue jobs that take longer than 15 minutes, you either will need to chunk your jobs into smaller pieces, or the documentation explicitly says, or consider another deployment solution. So Vapor is effectively telling you, we can't get around this for you. If you need jobs that need run longer than 15 minutes, and you can't chunk them, you should probably investigate something else. For queues, same as I mentioned for HTTP requests, Vapor will allow your queue to process jobs at its maximum concurrency at default, which is typically around 1,000 concurrent jobs. You can specify and lower or increase or whatever you need to do this concurrency per environment by adding a CLI-concurrency value to your environment's configuration. In the same realm as HTTP request, you can set the visibility timeout. If you're not as familiar with SQS, by default, if a queue job is not deleted from SQS or released within a minute of beginning to process, SQS will automatically try and retry the job. You can adjust this timeout appropriately depending on the workload of your queue items. And that's effectively it around queues. Storage. So when you're running in a serverless environments, you really can't store files permanently on the local file system, because you really can never guarantee that the subsequent request will wind up on the same serverless container that AWS is running behind the scenes. So you have to utilize cloud storage systems, such as AWS S3. If you need to attach storage to your environment, you just simply add a storage config value to your environment, in this case, storage my bucket name, and whenever you deploy the environment, Vapor will check to see if the bucket exists, and if it doesn't, Vapor will create and configure it for you. And as a reminder, bucket names must be unique across all of AWS, not just your account, but the entirety of AWS as a whole. Your bucket name has to be unique. I actually just learned that last week, which was kind of surprising to me. File uploads. So this gets really fun. There's actually a Vapor NPM package if your application accepts file uploads from end users, from the front end. You, instead of like pushing the file to the application to then deal with the upload, it's suggested you actually stream the user's uploads directly to S3 from your front end. Vapor provides a nice helper for this through the Laravel-Vapor NPM package, installing it simply as an NPM command, and then making Vapor available to your application. Window.vapor equals require Laravel Vapor.
Say I want to make like responsive images, and I want to use like a package like media library to do that. Would it be better to not use the Laravel package and instead use like the built-in S3 like image converter thing? I haven't used that before, but
Potentially, I honestly don't have a good answer to that question.
S3 doesn't have an image. Wait, so like what do you mean responsive image?
Where it'll like convert an image into like a thumbnail and then like.
Probably,
I don't think so.
The Cloudflare has what they call polish that'll do some encoding and stuff,
Oh,
but S3 itself does not have. It's just storage. Now you can layer stuff on top of that and like fire off cube jobs into lambdas or whatever when you upload photos, so you can resize it that way. But S3 in and of itself isn't going to do anything other than storing files.
Okay.
AWS actually, because I just actually deployed this solution today with minor adjustments for our use case, which was really fun, trying to figure out CloudFormation on the fly. They have a CloudFormation template provided through their AWS solutions called Serverless Image Handler. Effectively, if you deploy this, you take the CloudFormation URL, you go into CloudFormation and tell it to create a stack using this template, answer a few questions such as cores being enabled, and then the key one is the bucket or buckets images can be in. And then it deploys an API gateway and a Lambda function and a CloudFront distribution and all this stuff for you, effectively to give you a endpoint that you can either do a in URL manipulation of the image or make a like base64 encoded request to it to manipulate images on the fly using Lambda. So you can get your, basically instead of having to do a queue item that takes the upload and then resizes it to all the dimensions you need, you could, if you're on AWS, use this solution to effectively make it to where you can have the URL and just have like domain /64 by 64 / the actual file name, and it'll dynamically resize and deliver the image in a 64 by 64 dimension. Or you could still have that resizing functionality if you use the NPM package, let it stream into S3 directly, and then if you use PHP League's Glide package, which effectively does the same thing. You pass in URL params, whatever, and how it works, based on my past knowledge, is finding that image, reading it, making the manipulations that you specify in the URL, and then caching that, saving it back to S3, so that the next time you request it, it just loads what was already manipulated. So there's a few ways to go about it. Vapor's suggestion is to use this though, just so you don't have to juggle the file uploads.
And my guess on one of the reasons why it's doing that is if you have somebody on a slow connection with a large file upload, if you're doing like file storage sort of thing, you might be sitting there for more than 15 minutes streaming that upload.
Yeah.
And you want that to go to S3 rather than time it to land until the land expires. Yeah.
Most likely so. So this npm package, basically, it comes with a Vapor store helper, which just handles generating a pre-signed storage URL for the file and uploading it to S3. As for authorization, before initiating the upload directly to S3, Vapor's will basically do like an internal, we'll call an internal signed storage URL generator to perform the authorization check. If you don't already have a user policy in your Laravel app, you can make one quickly using the rsn make policy, user policy, specify the model for your user, and then just add a method to that policy object called upload files that takes in the user object, and if they can upload files, return true, otherwise return false, and that basically handles the authentication for users being able to upload stuff on the fly for you. And then for actually streaming to S3, you use the Vapor store method within your front-end code to upload directly to the S3 bucket attached to your environment. So you don't actually have to tell it what that bucket is, etc. Vapor's already is aware of what that is because you've already attached it to the environment in the config. An example of what this would look like in Vue.js code will be this, calling Vapor store, passing in the actual files. If you actually specify a progress, or it has the progress tracking if you want to show a progress bar to the upload, and then you'll get a response. That response will contain a UUID, the actual key to the object in S3, the bucket it was uploaded to, and then obviously you can still access the real file name from the user's object and the content type. Basically, instead of uploading the file directly to an endpoint to store it associated with the whatever, for example, this example, profile photo, et cetera, you're instead saying, hey, this object's already uploaded, here's the identifier and all the information associated with it, tie this to the thing. In this case, actually make the user's profile photo this photo that's already uploaded into S3. All the files uploaded via this are placed in a tip directory within your bucket, and the directory is automatically configured to purge any files older than 24 hours. This is just to help with like users that started uploading and then canceled it, or never like finished the full process. They uploaded a profile photo, for example, but never saved the changes. Instead of holding on to all those files and paying for them, it'll just clear them out of the tip directory. Using the system, you'll need to actually acknowledge the file uploads and store them permanently. They're stored using a UUID as their file name, so when you actually, like that API profile photo, for example, part of that logic will basically be a storage copy, giving it the request input key, so the key in S3, and then moving it out of temp to permanent storage within the bucket. And that's all Vapor really talks about on storage. Any questions?
Thank you so much for doing that.
No problem.
Great presentation. Thank you.
So now I dive into networks. I will preface this with, this is a very meaty section that I'm very intentionally leaving sparse because there's a lot behind networks, especially because Vapor is effectively dealing with and solving the AWS VPC problem for you. VPCs are a very complex topic and more than I want to dive into for this. But effectively, this is kind of straightforward. Networks, they host your databases, the caches, your jump boxes, and the applications within AWS. Even though these networks are displayed in the Vapor UI for you to review and look at, you most times are not required, nor will you need to interact with the network directly when you're using Vapor. When you create a project in a region that doesn't contain any previous Vapor project, Vapor will automatically provision the network for you. Jump boxes, so some Vapor resources, private databases, cache clusters are not going to be accessible from the public internet. To access them, you'll need something called a jump box. You can create a jump box very easily by using the Vapor jump and giving it a name for your jump box. They're basically just very small SSH accessible servers that are placed within your private network, and once it's created, Vapor will actually provide you with the private SSH key you need to access the jump box. And from there, we're all might be familiar with this of like, instead of connecting to a database via the direct IP address using a password, you have to instead do the SSH tunnel to then connect to it. That's where these jump boxes come in. You'll configure your GUI or whatever to SSH into the jump box first, and then connect to the database host from there, and you can do your local introspection, etc., and it's less painful. NAT gateways, if your application winds up interacting with a private database or a cache cluster, it will require a NAT gateway, and that's about all I'm going to dive into. This is where it gets very VPC heavy, which is a very heavy topic. I'm intentionally glossing over it. Sorry. The documentation goes into further details. I recommend reading it there.
How good did it feel to write that last sentence? Instead of when you're like, oh, I don't have to delve into so much of this, I can just.
It felt kind of nice because we've gone through, like, we just did a VPC migration at work, and we had like 2 different dev tech talks on VPC, and still it's like I kind of get what's going on mostly, but still there's a lot and whoosh, over my head. So we touched on this very, very earlier, well, roughly an hour or so ago. Load balancers. So by default, Vapor will route your HTTP traffic to your application using AWS's API gateway. Alternatively, you can switch your application to using an application load balancer, typically referred to as an ALB. Like by default, using the API gateway, it's kind of nice. When you're using it, AWS will only bill you based on the amount of requests your application receives. But if your application very quickly climbs to a very high scale, API gateway will actually become more, or can become more expensive than your Lambda functions themselves. Application load balancers, on the other hand, provide large cost savings at scale. An example the documentation provides is if an application receives about 1 billion requests per month, using an application load balancer instead of API gateway can save you about $4,000 on your application's monthly bill. So, something to keep in mind. If you need to create a load balancer, you can use the Vapor UI, broken record, or use the balancer CLI command. Very straightforward, Vapor balancer, give it a name, and then to utilize the load balancer, you just attach it to an environment by adding the balancer keyword to the Vapor YAML configuration for your environment, give it the same name as the balancer you just created, and Vapor will automatically wire things up. One thing to keep a note, by default, Vapor, I mentioned certificates before, and I'll get into it a little bit later. Vapor creates all SSL certificates in the US East 1 region, regardless of where your product's actually running. When your application is using API Gateway, AWS is smart and will automatically replicate your certificate across all regions behind the scenes. If you're using an application load balancer to route traffic, though, you'll actually have to create a certificate in the region that the project is deployed in. Something to keep in mind if you make that change from API Gateway to ALB. Databases. So, in the typical Laravel fashion, Vapor makes things easy, including creating, managing RDS or Aurora serverless databases. Databases created by Vapor have backups performed automatically, and you can restore a database to any point in time, down to the second, within the backup protection window, which is about 3 days. Creating a database is straightforward. Use the ULI, or in this example, use the CLI, Vapor database, give it a name. When you use the CLI, it'll prompt you for more details about the database, such as the desired performance class, the maximum storage space. By default, Vapor creates a Vapor database within each database instance you create. You can then use whatever tool, GUI, command line, etc., to create more databases, more users to your heart's content. Nice, another typo. So there are 2 database types available to you when you're creating Vapor databases. You can either choose from 2 types, a fixed size or auto-scaling serverless database. If you go the fixed size database route, you'll get a RDS MySQL 8.0 database that have a fixed amount of RAM and disk space. If you decide to go for serverless, you'll get a auto-scaling Aurora MySQL 5.6 database.
Dumb question, but isn't there Aurora MySQL 8 now?
No, Aurora tops out at 5.7.
Yeah. And this probably should actually be 5.7.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Aurora serverless tops out at 5.6 because consistency.
Oh, yeah, so that might actually be true. Because I honestly, until reading Vapor's docs, I didn't know Aurora had serverless functionality.
But what about Postgres? Does Postgres support it?
What's a Postgres?
No. So, these serverless databases scale based on the application's the needs of your application. At their smallest, they're a gigabyte of RAM. These serverless databases are required to be private and will place any application that you attach them to in a network with a NAT gateway, which does incur extra costs, etc., for that NAT gateway VPC stuff. Because most times you'll probably need one of these. Vapor actually provides you a way to get a quick development database by just using the Vapor database, give it a name --dev flag, and this will just create a publicly accessible database of the smallest performance class possible. So if you need to play with database type things, do quick development, you can use this command and not have to worry about jump boxes, yada yada yada. Gets the job done. As for using them, once you create it, you just update your Vapor configuration file for your environment to specify a database and the database name that you just created. Straightforward. Vapor will then automatically handle the environment variables, etc., to make the application connect. I'm not going to go into how to connect to a database using whatever GUI tool of your choice. I trust that a lot of us are familiar with that concept at this point. But if you are working with a private database, you'll have to, after you provision a jump box for your network, you can actually use the Vapor command database:shell, which will just automatically get you a MySQL shell into this private database if you're more of a command line MySQL user. Scaling databases. So the serverless options will automatically scale. If you decide to go for fixed size databases, you can still scale these. Once again, using the UI or the CLI command database scale. Whenever you're scaling fixed size databases, there will be a downtime because it actually has to take the database down to scale it. So Vapor's recommendation, I'm kind of surprised it doesn't do this automatically for you, but it is recommended to put your application in maintenance mode before you begin scaling. Otherwise, your application is going to probably break, since most of them are very database heavy these days. I mentioned it earlier, but Vapor does database backups automatically, and you can restore your database to pretty much any point in time within the retention period, which is currently 3 days. You can either use the UI or the CLI using Vapor Database Restore. You specify the current database name, and then you'll specify a new database name, because it'll, instead of restoring in place, it'll actually just create a new database based off of the restore point's contents, and then after that you just update your configuration to point to this new database, and then deploy, and you're back to the correct database state if something bad goes down. Much like the rest of Vapor, databases have metrics tied to them. You can access them via the UI or using the CLI, doing database colon metrics, your database name, specify intervals, and much like the HTTP metrics for your application I mentioned previously, you can also configure alarms for database metrics, and that's really about it for databases.
And I just confirmed that, yes, the Aurora serverless database does top out at 5.6. Standard Aurora tops out at 5.7. RDS from MySQL tops out at 8.0 because consistency.
I'm excited, guys. So, if you need to use MySQL features, you're going to get forced into fixed size. Caches. So, Vapor allows you to very easily create and manage scalable Redis clusters. AWS does require cache clusters through Elasticache to be private. So, if you utilize a Redis cache, you'll immediately have your application placed in the network within that gateway. Once again, there's an extra monthly cost for running that gateway within the VPC. Once again, you can create them using the UI or using the CLI, Vapor cache name, and then to use them, this is probably getting very repetitive and forming a pattern. You add a cache key to your environment's configuration, specifying the name of the cache you just created. Whenever the environment's deployed, Vapor will do its automatic injection to have your application connect to cache immediately. If you need to connect to your cache locally for any sort of an inspection, you'll need to create a jump box. But once you create a jump box, you can actually use the Vapor CLI's cache tunnel command. Once you run that command, your cache cluster in Redis will be available to connect to on localhost :6378, Redis's default port. You can scale caches via the UI or using the cache scale command. And this formats Vapor cache scale, the name of your cache, and then the number of nodes you're scaling to. Scaling cache should typically not cause any downtime, unlike scaling a fixed size database, and your cache keys will just be automatically sharded across all the available nodes. And as everything else, your cache has metrics of their own, accessible in the UI, Vapor cache metrics, your cache name, things, alarms are available for this. Consistency. So, Vapor actually utilizes Laravel's DynamoDB cache driver. And when you create a project, it will automatically ensure that an auto-scaling DynamoDB cache table is available in the project's region. If you don't specify, like if you don't attach any Redis cache to the environment, the DynamoDB cache is automatically set as the default cache driver. These caches are not going to be as performant as Redis clusters, but they do provide a low-cost alternative for applications that maybe really don't need a lot of caching. And automatically, Vapor will configure Laravel's task scheduler to use the DynamoDB cache to avoid overlapping tasks. As we're nearing the end, domains. So Vapor is effectively, because it's built on top of Amazon's Route 53, a registrar. So if you like, you can actually just purchase new domains directly within Vapor's UI. They're purchased using Amazon Route 53, so all domains you purchase through Vapor will be linked to the AWS account you're currently using. When it's purchased through Vapor, it'll automatically create a DNS zone and a wildcard certificate for the domain, effectively allowing you to begin using the domain immediately. If you already own a domain via Route 53 that you're attaching to this, you can use the Add Domain button within Vapor to specify it, and Vapor will effectively realize that it already exists in Route 53 because you already purchased, and import it into Vapor and create all the appropriate DNS zone records and everything. And introduction, most of us here are familiar with what DNS records are, but they point your domain names to the servers running your application. Vapor has a nice interface for managing DNS records, all built on top of Route 53. For creating zones, to effectively begin managing a domain DNS record through Vapor, you should create a DNS zone for the domain. Straightforward command, Vapor zone domain name. Whenever you create a zone, Vapor will provide you with the DNS zone's names servers. If your domain registrar is AWS, you don't have to worry about it. You could ignore the information it provides. It's already all configured. If you're not using AWS for your registrar, say you purchased a domain that AWS doesn't support the TLD for, you'll need to use these name servers to update that domain, whatever managing DNS for it, to point to the application correctly. In that same vein, certificates. I mentioned a long time ago, Vapor provides free auto-renewing SSL certificates to your application. To create them, you can either create them via the UI or using the CLI. The certificates can either do a DNS or email validation. To create your certificate using DNS validation, you can use the UI or the CLI running Vapor certexample.com. Once you request a certificate, you'll obtain 2 CNAME records. If you're using Vapor to manage your DNS, you're done. You don't have to worry about it. Otherwise, you'll take those CNAME records and add them to your DNS provider manually. And that is Vapor in a very large, long nutshell. Any questions?
No. Okay, so kind of say this to the end because I was hoping it would be addressed, and it never really was. But this has to do with CloudFront, the CDN. Because, okay, so like very commonly, of course, you write, let's say like you deploy a new application, like you said, it has this like new page, or you deploy an update via Vapor, and it has this like new page with like some new static assets, like new images, let's say. I don't want to think about that because it's the headache, but new images, let's say. So the issue is that these images are going in CloudFront, and they take like some time to sort of propagate through CloudFront and update. So people, isn't there like a risk that people see like for an image like right after a deployment, or?
So from experience on the CloudFront side of things, at least from what I've seen, and y'all can correct me if y'all have seen different, but if you have a brand new image, then that'll get pulled from the origin immediately.
Yeah.
The only issue is that CloudFront likes to serve stale content, even unless you put really low TTLs on everything, and even then you may still have issues. But it's for brand new stuff, you don't really have an issue of oh well, it's got a 404. It's just it'll pull. It's just stale stuff.
Yeah, and I remember that now. But yeah, but the main issue, I mean, this is especially a huge issue with JavaScript, where you have like a big app.js or whatever. Like,
it's why you throw content hashes on it and vary those hashes and don't look at the same files.
Okay, but is there like some stuff in Vapor to like kind of help make sure you do that, I guess?
I don't know if it's specifically in Vapor. Vapor doesn't really reveal the like inner workings of what it's doing. Really, all it touches on is that if your assets stay unchanged, it copies them from deployment to deployment, and then if an asset changes, it uploads to S3. So I don't really know what it's doing to CloudFront behind the scenes for that. I know you have to use the asset helper. I can't remember if the asset helper
The asset
automatically does
helper
the cache
bust.
busting. I know the mix helper from Laravel Mix did the cache busting stuff.
Yeah.
My assumption is asset does as well.
My guess on asset helper is just it's pointing at the correct CloudFront origin. It's not doing anything special on its side. But if Mix is doing cache busting on the production rollout, that's going to be enough. But you just have to make sure that my guess is with the asset URLs, it's going to point at the cache busted version of it, which means you should be good to go across the board. Versus like having a single page app where you would have to have a base page that's served from CloudFront, in which case kind of all bets are off. But since you're serving stuff via lambdas anyway that are going to go through API gateway, you don't really have that issue. You can say, no, I want the base application to serve this URL now.
Okay. So now more like hard question, but is anyone planning like a greenfield application with Laravel Vapor and Livewire? Because that would be pretty cool, pretty shiny.
I know I'm not. I don't do much
The
greenfield
issue,
or fun projects anymore.
the issue with Vapor right now is that you've got a minimum cost to set all of that stuff up with the base level of database and that sort of thing.
And like 60 a month, it's not that much, just like 60, 80 a month.
So you just said a greenfield fun project though on an application platform that hasn't been released yet.
Yeah, but 80 a month to have like a lot of fun.
It's actually
So what you're saying is you're going to learn how to dev and be that guinea pig that you want to see.
It would be way too much like stuff I need to learn.
I remember seeing this. I mean, I immediately just set up billing on it. I mean, I'm going to cancel it sooner or later, hopefully sooner, so I'm just eating that cost and not using it. But I remember reading the documentation that you don't actually have to set up billing yet to do a lot of Vapor stuff. I think you can basically utilize and play with Vapor to the point of going live with it, and then you have to start doing the billing. So I don't know if that means environments, or if you just cannot deploy environments.
Sounds like an early access thing to me.
I don't know. I mean, the documentation's, I believe, open to the public. But, yeah, I don't know. When I first hit the main splash screen, it showed the steps of set up billing, and then do this, do that, and then the documentation mentions you don't have to set up billing first, so. But I do remember like individual, or there was like 2 different billing things, and I think the one I did is like $39.99, and then
Yeah, it's either $39 a month for Vapor Plus or AWS costs, or it's $3.99 a year, I think.
yeah. And Vapor does have the concept of teams and inviting collaborators and all that jazz. Just not something I was gonna really dive into. That one you can figure out pretty quickly and easily yourself. Do the docs.
My dream is that a job I take 5 years from now or something will have like a beautiful like Vapor plus LiveWire setup where everything's just like amazing.
Yeah, but then what are you going to do as a DevOps person for a job where all the DevOps is done by Vapor?
Well, obviously at this point I was converted to a developer or something.
So did you make something?
I made a very, very like dumb thing. Cool. My Wi-Fi disconnected at some point. Guest. Wow, that really. Oh, Docker has been eating my battery in the background.
Vapor doesn't do all the DevOps stuff. Like it doesn't do like CI pre yet.
Yeah, but that's what like Chipper CI, is that the one that?
Oh.
Yeah. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I set up a really cool feature lately where when you have like a JavaScript repo. So we have a JavaScript repo, and I made it so that when so I already had it so that like when you push commands to the JavaScript repo, it releases like a new npm version. And now I also made it so when you do that, it also commits to the PHP repo and opens a merge request saying update the JavaScript repo dependency to the latest version. So Vapor won't do that for you, will it?
I don't think so. So I
Why don't you just
deployed
pull everything in as Dev Master?
the best way.
Because yeah, I'm not gonna answer that question because I think the answer is part of the answer is itself.
So I deployed just basically a base install application of Laravel plus a slight tweak more on the API side of things. So I deployed, I got 2 environments, staging and production. Production's not actually deployed yet, so this is the staging environment. You can see the vanity URL here, Snowy Storm 7, and then I believe starting from 7, I think is like the random characters assigned to probably the API gateway, or it's just some random hash Laravel's or Vapor's generating. .vaporfarmv1.com. And this is just your standard welcome screen on a brand new Laravel install. I made a tweak to just API, run that.
Wow, very
It's
cool.
same IP, which seems to be localhost, so I probably need to actually configure trusted proxies to actually give me the real IP address. The message is set, and then a randomly generated ID for tonight's meetup, Vapor True.
Yeah.
So I could, so here's that Vapor YAML config file I mentioned. Here's the API. Just simply do some changes. And then Vapor deploy staging. And it'll very quickly build a project. This step is effectively just copying everything to a .vapor folder, running the build hooks, which just compose or install. And now it's, I believe, going through the, no, it's still doing build hooks.
It's effectively doing a CI process on your local to build the build artifact.
Correct.
So any like cache busting stuff or whatever with mix would be done here.
Yeah. So a bunch of Webpack bullshit, doing this thing, building all the CS and JS assets, and processing and updating the assets if there's anything, removing important files, injecting the error pages.
SSL certs, all that fun jazz. Oh,
Very cool.
Cool. Maybe she might have broken it. Uploading, doing none of the assets actually changed, so not much is happening. Effectively all the stuff that we talked about, like check to see if storage is there, make sure that that Dynamo DB cache tables.
And pushing assets that have been now minified by mix or whatever over to CloudFront. Well, CloudFront S3 bucket rather.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm very curious to see if as is the at.js is stale or not.
I mean, I didn't make any changes to it, so
Okay.
it's not really going to change. If I come here, refresh this environment URL, our new properties are visible in the JSON response, and that took like a minute and a half to deploy. If I was playing with this, if I was switch tabs or split the terminal window of Firefox, I could have just been sitting here spamming the refresh button over and over as it's deploying. It would have still responded correctly, and then all of a sudden the new properties added would appear out of nowhere. Seamlessly, unbeknownst to the user. Nice and straightforward. The Vapor UI is pretty straightforward and minimal. We can dive into the environments. I can see the active deployments. I can see the recent deployments. And if I dive into that, I can see all the steps, see what the manifest looked like at the time of that deployment, all the steps it ran. If I wanted to, I could tell it to run a command. So I can tell it to run Arson Inspire.
Yes. Nice.
It ran. Can see the output. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Vinci, great. No logs tied to it.
I'm inspired now.
If I had any secrets, I can manage them here. I can see the metrics tied to the environment. I've got no alarms set up at the moment, but you can see various stats. I'm surprised because I've not been running any requests to it. Those are, but you can see my whopping estimated cost so far for this environment is 1 penny.
Boys.
Really breaking my bank. You can see a graph of HTTP request. The average duration, we can see it jumped up here, probably from when I ran the first request to and having to warm the environment back up, since I haven't communicated with it since last night. You can see CO line queue indications over that period of time, and the average duration of that. And at any point in time, I can, to get alarms, I have to configure a notification method, and those are email, Slack, or webhook. Either incoming webhook URL or just a custom webhook if you've got a custom solution or something not listed on, like built in the Vapor but has webhook functionality. You can see the AWS accounts I've added, which is just modernizes, but if you've got multiple, you can specify them here. I'm on, by default, you start on a personal team, you can create new teams, the UI or the CLI. Diving back into the project, environment. I can actually see the logs live. There have not been any logs of note to the application via HTTP. I can switch over to the CLI queue. Once again, no logs, but I do have the option to switch back to HTTP, view it live, and check the show raw CloudWatch logs, which will kind of give you a peek behind the curtain of various things of creating different storage directories that FPM is running. It's ready to handle connections, stuff like that. But most of this you probably don't care about, so you can hide the raw CloudWatch logs, and it'll by default just show you what your search criteria is looking for. And then, yeah, notifications. So you can, once you configure a notification method, you can then set up the notifications to be told when an deployment is successful and fails. And then here, you know your resources. I created a database, though I never actually associated with anything, but you can see all the stats here. It's set up in West 1.
That is runs on a micro instance, actually.
I chose the smallest one.
Yeah, but I was
So
surprised it actually.
micro instance as in RDS micro size. They use the same tier names, but it's not an EC2 instance.
I did make this one
like 512 RAM, so it's fine.
Micro is 1 gig, Nano is 512.
Oh, yeah.
I made this one publicly available. If the UI admittedly has slight bug, which potentially could just be a Firefox issue, where it wouldn't let me copy the password from the input field, which was slightly annoying. But if you make it public, it gives you, the username is always going to be Vapor, then it generates a password for you, and then once you close that dialog, it's effectively gone forever, which only matters if you need to do like local inspection. If you just need it for your application and you're going to look at it locally, it doesn't matter. You just update your app to talk to demo database in this example, and it will automatically set up the new variables with what it needs. You can make new users. Apparently a jump box is required in order to manage database users. Different database metrics. I'm not tied this to an environment, nor is the demo application using doing anything in the database. So
I have another silly question. Is Modernize thinking about using Vapor or not really?
it's not even been discussed. I just need an AWS account, and I asked my boss, "Hey, can I use this?" And he's like, "Yeah." Okay, cool.
Oh man, why not though?
Or
Because it's pre-release software.
that, but also we're
right.
very monolithic at the moment, so we're not planning on moving our monolith into Lambdas. We've already done most of the work to move it to Docker containers through ECS, so
That's a fair assessment.
UI for creating caches, and then the UI for effectively purchasing a new domain. To purchase one, you have to actually provide your local address on your contact information before you can actually purchase the domain. And yeah, that's Vapor.
I'm gonna try to see if I can get something running on it when it comes out. So I'll let you know how that goes. But,
You should. I would love to use this for something personal, but most of the personal stuff I'm running is running just fine on a DigitalOcean droplet.
yeah. Well, so, but for the company stuff, I mean.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not. It's not like a plan we have, but it's more like sort of like, oh, we should see like how feasible it is, because why not, more kind of thing. So.
Totally.
Well, first you have to shift everything to Laravel 6.
Yeah, that's on the list. That's on the list. I mean, Laravel 6 is out, where you were already on the latest version. Yeah, that's a plan in the near future. So.
Those are our plans soon, though we plan on letting 6 cook for a little bit longer.
And we actually came up, the
Already on
CTO saw Vapor, it was like, might be interesting, because we were using Docker clusters, and apparently it's not that easy to manage. So,
The Docker clusters.
yeah.
Yeah, we're about to switch to the Docker cluster ECS route, which I hope will go as smoothly as I'm thinking it will. Hopefully.
Well, at least with ECS, you've got Amazon's opinions baked on everything, so that stuff might actually work the way you expect. Whereas with the Kubernetes side of things, it's like, so we have a thing, it's supposed to be generic, so it doesn't actually integrate well with anybody's cloud stuff, including Google's. And they wrote the freaking thing.
Yeah. We already know that our application runs in Docker because we technically already have a system set up to create branch environments of our application. In effect, every time you open up a pull request, we're not fully utilizing it yet because we're like half-assed to branch environments. We still need to solve the per environment database problem. But we know it works. We just gotta do the rest of the picture of getting staging running on it, so QA can give it a pass and then get production on it.
What version of PHP are you on? Because Laravel 6 actually requires 7.2.
We are on 7.2.
Same.
The Vapor says it needs 7.3.
Vapor needs
So
7.3, yeah. But Laravel 6 needs 7.2.
Yep.
that's all I got.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
I mean, I think it's really cool. The dream is that I don't need to have a job anymore. Like, Vapor is amazing. The reality is.
The reality is that if you have a spider that takes a significant amount of time per job or something like that, then it's going to be hard to ship that into it.
No, because each individual,
If you have units of work that are less than a few minutes, then sure.
well, each queue thing. Wait, how does it actually work? How does? That's a good Laravel Vapor question. How does artisan queue work in Vapor? Does it? It should be fine actually, because like so long as each individual queue job isn't over 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It should, but I wonder if it would like interrupt ones in the middle a lot, or
If they, my guess is that the way that the Vapor queue stuff works, and this is just a guess, is that instead of doing a standard kind of persistent queue worker thing, it's only going to, it is pulling stuff, is getting stuff pushed to SQS and then pulling stuff back off of SQS or well Dynamo or whatever via Lambda calls.
Yeah.
And each job gets a single Lambda call, and your
Yeah.
clock starts ticking when the job starts and ends when the job ends.
in that case it might work fine. The thing is each individual one doesn't take a long time. Just we have like 20,000. But like I could actually work quite well. Potentially. I mean, it's sort of the thing where you gotta like actually try it to see like where it's gonna work and where it's not gonna not work. So that's the plan, is to actually try it at some point. Yeah.
At the end of the day, Lambda's going to kill your shit after 15 minutes. And since you're using SQS for queue, you can't even delay past 15 minutes queue items. So if you need any of those things, you could probably still use Vapor. You're just going to have to override the queue configuration to use something else like Redis.
No, I think
And from what it sounds like, there's, at some point, I need to crack open a one of the Lambda functions that Vapor actually builds and see how it layers things on. Because it sounds like it's actually shoving requests. It is taking the request from Lambda, then turning it into something else, and then shoving it to FPM, which is interesting. It means that there's a higher likelihood that standard Laravel applications will actually work rather than it's like, oh yeah, it's a special execution environment that the requests behave completely differently. But that's another thing to check, I guess.
When there's pizza left over, as always, I cannot eat any of it, so please feel free to take it home. There's some soda for you to take home, should you want. What was supposed to be Sprite instead became orange Fanta. I don't understand dominoes these days. Or Dr. Pepper.
Sure you got the right order? Or, I mean, are you sure they gave you the right order?
We got the right number of pizzas, I think, so.
Yeah, I did, because I got my instructions correctly.
Please deliver extremely early.
Yeah.
With incorrect soda. Surprising.
Yep.
It's that. I had to double check, okay. Okay. I had to double check.
Pizza?
I had to double check.
I'm gonna walk somewhere. I will see you another year.
See ya. Hopefully, not a stranger.
Well, now that I'm not working, now that I'm doing closer now, so
Rasmus?
I might make it up tomorrow.
Sweet. Happy to have you.
All right.
Good to see you again, sir. Have a good night.
So once it's in ECS, will it be auto-scaling and stuff, or?
Us, most likely.
See you.
See you, man.
Did you figure out the remaining schedule?
I have nothing else planned after this talk, so
Okay.
it is completely open to whenever you'd like to present.
Yeah,